Welcome to episode 41 of Out of Bounds, a podcast where I give my social commentary on different topics in today's society. I'm your host, Terry, and today doing part 2 of Education Needs to Change. And today we're talking about performance metrics and the pressure of performance. And so part 1, if you didn't listen to that, I would go listen to that because that gives you a lot of background on what I'm talking about. Because today I'm going to get right into it. When we're talking about performance metrics and the pressure of it, I think part 1 we talked, I think most importantly about the student and what they bring to the table as far as motivation and things that can change their beliefs with the graded system. However, there's the other part of the adults in the room and what we're doing to help or make the problem worse. And so we're in an age where in America, we're very data driven. We've always been a capitalist society, but we're very data driven right now. And everybody wants to talk about analytics and data. Not everybody knows what it is or what it really means. We just get so focused on the number and not the context. And so that comes the problem when you tie money into data. And on the surface, I understand it makes sense if you're talking about business. And again, I'm a business major as an undergrad. Education wasn't my first experience. And so I understand it. You're talking about where do we want to put the money into? There's different ways you can do it as far as education and figuring out budgets. But one of the big things now is the data. We want to see how you are performing, and evaluating how you perform is important. I agree. But when you tie it to money, then there becomes the pressure for the human to have error. And so what I mean by the pressure of performance, I've worked in many places that you will see that everybody understands where the evaluation is coming from. Everybody understands what numbers these people are looking at, not only for their job and, not being fired, but also for their reputation and everything in their career advancement. And so it's not purely just the education of the children. It never will be, because we're human. And so with humans, you have the selfish motivations that are tied up in it, as far as, again, trying to advance your own agenda. And so with that, just like a student is going to understand and read out pretty fast what the teacher is valuing. And teachers and adults are going to read out pretty fast what their supervisors are valuing. And so you're going to figure out what is important to the school. And if you pay attention to the news, especially in bigger schools and bigger school systems like Chicago, you'll know exactly what is important, because it's what's tied to government money. Who's going to give us a bigger budget? Who's going to give us grants? Who's going to do all these different things is going to be tied up to a few metrics. And we're talking about, as far as Chicago at least, and other places too, the main things we're talking about is test performance, standardized tests. So ACT averages, SAT and all that. What's the scores? We're talking about graduation rates. How many people are you graduating? We're talking about college enrollment rates. Where are people going after they graduate? Are they going to college? Do you not know? And so those become big things to look at. And when you have that tied to monetary value, to your own professional value, that's when you have the opportunity for people to do shady things. And so I won't name any names, but I've been at a school, I remember, where you had a teacher, and you imagine yourself, if you're a teacher or not, imagine yourself walking in and you come from, fresh out of your program. You have all these innovative ideas, but you also have this passion for education and really shaping the youth, not just being there to get a check and be part of the system, but you really want to make things better. And so you get in there and you hold these students to a standard, a rough standard. You're that tough teacher, but you're fair. And then guess what? These students who have possibly been coddled through the system, and I'm thinking high school. Forgive me. I'm literally talking about a high school teacher, not an elementary school teacher. But you know, these students that possibly been coddled up through the system. You got students again that have been discouraged by grades and don't care about the education system. And then they get to your classroom and you're holding them to a standard that they're not used to and don't want to abide by, and they start failing. And so you become a teacher after 2-3 years where you have a really high failure percentage. What do you think is going to happen with that teacher? You know what I mean? Is the principal going to be like, okay, I support that. That's what you would hope. But you got parents calling. You got parents coming up to the school complaining. You got students complaining. You got students that have gave up because they heard you're a bad teacher or you're a tough teacher. And so now they're going to find any excuse they can to get out of your class, or they're going to find excuses to blame you for the reason they're failing. And so now they can't come out and say, hey, look, you need to pass more students. They can't do that. That's not legal. But there's going to be those subtle hints and pressure. And so then that teacher, when they're thinking about their tenure, when they're thinking about, you know, keeping their job and everything, they're going to weigh that up against keeping these students to a standard. And what do you think most teachers end up choosing? And so that's what you have with the public system, a vicious circle. And it's just like the same thing in our society in those areas. But that's what it becomes. It becomes this circle of, you know, the pressure to perform in these metrics, and how that ultimately just deteriorates your own motivation to teach students, because now you're motivated by keeping your job. And I've seen it at like its worst angle, in which is kind of subtle, or at, you know, a subtle angle where it's not as bad. But I've seen it at its worst angle where it's pretty much, I was in a school where one time they said that teachers giving a student an F had to fill out basically a report in all these different aspects of why you were failing that kid. And so what that does is it shifts the onus and the blame essentially to the teacher. And I'm not saying teachers shouldn't be held responsible and accountable. They should. But that's not the way to do it. And so every teacher had to fill out a report if they were going to fail a student, to see what did they do. Did they exert all their resources to help that student? And that becomes a problem. That becomes, again, as I mentioned many times before, coddling a student. And now it's up to me to make sure they pass instead of the student having any responsibility. And it should be a happy medium. But how much further does that go? I mean, again, when you're talking about the principal level, the administrative level, when the school needs to hit a certain percentage to get a certain amount of funding, or when the school needs to hit a certain percentage in different areas to get a rating, you know, in Chicago public schools, that's what they did. They had a rating system or whatever. And so you need so many points to improve your rating, because that's going to help you attract more students and all these different things. So then what becomes the ethical temptations for people to go out there and play with the numbers, or to lean on your teachers and tell them they need to do this, or to, you know, do all these different things. And, you know, we hear the college higher education scandal with the Ivy Leagues and the parents that paid off people to get their students into colleges. So it has no end in sight, the reach that the temptation goes. But you can think about how many different ways this can play out in the school system. And so this all comes from the consumer mentality. We're in a capitalist society, as I mentioned. We pay for what we want. Things that we really want cost more than things that we don't want. And so if you can have something that's in demand, people are going to pay for it. And if people are going to pay for something, they want to make sure they're getting their money's worth. And so as people coming in, instead of as community members, instead of as parents, instead of as education, you know, or educators, when they're coming in as consumers, And they're looking to ask you right away, what are you providing me for the money I give? And now we know most public schools, especially in these districts, the cost is minimal compared to higher education, and definitely compared to private, secondary education. And so you're not paying a whole bunch. I feel like in my high school, I want to say our fees was like 78, something like that. And I'm sure it's up a little bit. It's probably like 150 something around that area. Not a whole bunch of money. And so, but you get these parents that feel entitled as consumers. What are you doing? But then more than that, you get the legislators, the government. They're sitting there, okay, we're giving out money. Well, what are you doing? What's the return on investment? And that's an economic term. That's a business term. But we've seen it creep into education, or at least I have in many places. What is the return on investment? We're giving you this money. What do you have to show for it? And there should be a level of accountability on schools and education to show you what they're producing. But at the same time, when you play it way too close to the vest, where like everything is riding on these numbers, and if you're not hitting these percentage, then that's when the temptation creeps in. And so I think ultimately, if you're talking about any secondary education, elementary too, I don't even want to get it started with the accelerated summer programs for people that failed classes and should be going to high school, but they're not, or failed any grade and they need to get promoted. I'm not even going to tell you the horror stories I heard about that and the lack of quality there. But then you get to high school and you're talking about getting people through the system, graduated just for your graduation rate, that aren't prepared for anything. And I'm not talking about the bottom of the barrel burnout that you just passed to get him out of school so he's not disruptive. I'm talking about the top 10 student that graduates, has a really inflated GPA on paper, goes to a nice school, and then comes back after a semester because they had no clue how to pass the math or science classes because your school did not prepare them at all. And so we're talking about watering down the quality in order to increase the quantity, because that's what numbers are at the end of the day. When we're trying to get a high graduation rate, we're trying to graduate as many people as possible. When we're trying to get a high enrollment rate, we're trying to enroll people into 4-year, 2-year schools, as many as possible, even if they don't necessarily belong going, to that institution right away because they're not prepared, or maybe they have interest at other places. But we're trying to get those numbers. And then we didn't even talk about charter schools. And if you don't know, the charter school is a big thing because it's private and all this. They make money, but they have these inflated numbers where it's like 100% of our graduated students get accepted to college, or 90% of our graduate students go and enroll in college, all these things. But the truth is, they have such stringent rules and, crazy circumstances that they pretty much weed out students all the way, from freshman year to senior year, to by the time they're in senior year, they have the best of that class. And I wouldn't even say the best, but the most obedient, the ones that are prepped to succeed on the test, the ones that are prepped to get into college, but not necessarily succeed in college when they get there. And it was interesting that until I got to my master's program and went back to college, I only saw the preparation part. I was like, okay, they got great numbers. I know they're a little tough on kids, but they got great numbers, must be working. But then I get to a college and I hear different people at different colleges talk about how these students from the charter systems, they just don't know how to function and, perform well. And they don't get retained at a high rate because they don't really know anything besides what they were prepped for to pass the test. And so they're not actual individual thinkers. And so it's everywhere. The pressure to perform and to give numbers because people value data way too much. They don't give any context to data. They just want to see the numbers. I've seen that in my position and everywhere else. They just want to see the numbers. And they don't even really ask too many questions of how you got to the numbers. They just want to hear pretty numbers. And they want you to paint a nice picture with your, visual data. And they move on. And they don't really ask questions of how we arrived to this data. What's the consequences after this data? And so with that issue, you got students that are being pushed through systems. You got students that are getting watered down educations. You get in students that aren't being correctly prepared for the real world, for the work world, or for, post-secondary education. And so one thing I'll point out, and I'm not accusing them, but again, so it's a big thing, and I just happen to work there. Chicago Public Schools. I happen to work there, as I mentioned. But one of the things that they're doing that is very rare in the nation is they're getting ready to institute a requirement that you have a post-secondary plan in order to graduate. And there's a lot of controversy, backlash, debate about if this works. I personally think it's fine. Again, I was one of those people in charge of all the seniors having a plan because your post-secondary plan was always a part of the conversation. You had to have that, but there was no teeth to it. And so the only way we could get students to make sure that they took it seriously, we'll say things about prom. We'll say things about senior year. We'll say things about graduation. But we really, at the end of the day, if a student just was steady and held fast, we couldn't stop them. But now that this has become a graduation requirement, now the parents pay attention. Now the students pay attention. And you actually have some teeth behind the policy. And so all we're saying is, senior year, we want you to participate in these activities and these exercises that get you thinking and working towards a plan after you graduate. And then by the time of graduation, we just want proof that you have got there. So if you're going to college, 4-year or 2-year, we want an acceptance letter. We want a financial aid letter to make sure you could pay for it. Simple things. If you're going to a training program or trade program, again, we want an acceptance letter to make sure that you'll be able to get, you've accepted and everything. Even if you are going into the workforce, if you saying F that, I'm working at McDonald's the rest of my life, we just want a letter of employment to make sure you're actually working. And I wouldn't say it's partly for the benefit of us making sure that we provided the support you need, but also it is the numbers, and the numbers are big. And so the noble intention, as I said, I agree with it. It's a noble intention to say we want every student to have some type of plan. But you can see how easily that's going to get messed up. And it was messed up before because the only thing that counted on the report card, I wanted to say report card, quote unquote, and that just messed me up. But the report card, quote unquote, the only thing that counted was the 4-year college enrollment. And so you can understand that in our position, we're supposed to support whatever a student wants, but the thing that helps our school looks better is the 4-year college enrollment or 2-year college enrollment. And so more times than not, you have people pushing people to college that didn't want to go or wasn't ready to go. But now with this requirement, you can go wherever you want to go. Military trade program, gap year program, 4-year, 2-year. You go wherever you want. We just need proof, and we want to work with you to make sure you got it all set. But again, you can see where this might turn into something a little different because certain things are weighted more. So if a student goes to a 4-year school, you might get more points for that. If they go to a 2-year school, you'll get more points for that. If they go to military, less points. Gap year, less points. And so now you can see the game and the politics that happens where a person like me would have to work with a student to get them to a certain place because I know I need a certain amount of points. And it's all about performance metrics. It's all about data. And that's the thing people care about. And they don't really care about, and I say quantitative data. They care about the numbers. Qualitative data, they don't care about as much. What is it that we are talking about? What are the issues that we're hearing from students? What are the things that we actually see that can affect our job? But they don't listen to that. They're more concerned with what are the numbers. And so you look at that from elementary all the way to high school, all the way to higher education, and you can see a pattern where that can become a problem. And yes, there are schools that perform well, that have the resources where they can think about learning for learning's sake. But you talk about the charter schools that are for profit. You talk about the public schools that are relying on funding. And you're looking at a bunch of people that are really held hostage by the numbers and can consequently have to sacrifice the quality of their work. And it's not that they're bad people. It is not even to say I never was one of those people. But you understand that the nature of society and the nature of the politics forces you to have to play the game. And it's kind of sad. And so if you're talking about solutions and all that, I mean, it's simple to me. You got to take a full holistic look. And I know higher education colleges are a lot more into taking holistic looks, especially for admissions. But I think for performance evaluation as well, you got to have it in context, because even a community college versus a four-year college, you can't grade them on the same scale. A four-year college graduation rate is one thing, but a two-year college graduation rate is different because students aren't always full-time. They don't always go consecutive semesters because they have other responsibilities. They're not always traditional age, so they got full-time jobs. Like, it's so many factors that you have to look at. And if we continue to ignore the context and just look at the surface numbers, then we're going to continue to have the same problems, and you're going to continue to have the same people making the same sacrifices in order to try to get ahead. So I could talk about this for a long time, but I'll leave it at that. Go to the comment section. Let me know what you think about the topic. Share it around. Get the conversation started. Thumbs up, subscribe, and until next episode.